Donald Trump is melting down right now, and it's not a small political tantrum. It's a full-blown panic as the disastrous consequences of his reckless foreign policy are exploding across the world. This is the nightmare scenario Trump never wanted Americans to see, because in a stunning and deeply humiliating moment, Trump has just publicly turned on one of America's closest allies, the United Kingdom, angrily complaining that Britain isn't helping him enough in his escalating confrontation with Iran. Let that sink in. At the very moment the world is sliding toward a dangerous regional war, Trump is lashing out at Britain like a furious strongman whose coalition is falling apart. Instead of leadership, we're witnessing something grotesque. A president whining that a Democratic ally refuses to blindly follow him into a potentially catastrophic conflict. Trump claims the UK didn't help. That's the line he's pushing. But the reality is far more embarrassing for him. Britain hasn't abandoned the United States at all. They're still allowing American forces to use military bases. What they refused to do was something far more responsible: directly join attacks that could ignite a much wider war across the Middle East. In other words, the adults in the room are trying to stop a disaster. And Trump's entire strongman image depends on something very different: obedience. The moment allies stop obeying, the illusion collapses. And that collapse is happening right now. As protests erupt, violence spreads, American facilities come under threat, and foreign leaders begin warning that Trump's reckless decisions could push the world toward something far darker. And when we dig into the details behind this global crisis, the truth becomes even more disturbing. Now here's where the story becomes even more revealing, because Donald Trump and his MAGA ecosystem are currently trying to spin this entire situation as if the United States is leading a powerful, united global coalition. But that's not what the facts show. Not even close. For months, Trump has been repeating the same talking point over and over again. According to him, the United States is supposedly leading a strong alliance determined to stop Iran's nuclear ambitions and maintain stability in the Middle East. He keeps telling his supporters that world leaders respect him, that allies are lining up behind him, and that his aggressive strategy is restoring American dominance. You've heard the speech before. Trump stands at a podium, chest puffed out, claiming the world has never respected America more. But now the receipts are coming out, and they expose something very different. Let's look at what actually happened. During a recent interview with a British tabloid, Trump openly complained that UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer didn't help at all in the US and Israeli military operations targeting Iran. That's Trump's own language, not limited cooperation, not strategic disagreement. Trump's words were blunt. Britain didn't help. Now think about the absurdity of that claim, because according to the very same reporting, Britain is still allowing US forces to use its military bases to support operations related to the Iran conflict. That's significant logistical cooperation. That's not abandonment. But for Trump, that isn't enough. He wanted something else entirely: direct military participation. And when he didn't get it, the mask slipped. Instead of diplomacy, Trump accused the British leader of trying to appease Muslim voters. That's the implication he floated when questioned about why the UK refused to join the attacks directly. Let that sink in for a moment. A sitting American president is now publicly suggesting that one of our closest Democratic allies is making national security decisions based on domestic religious politics. That's not diplomacy. That's political gaslighting. And it gets worse. Trump went even further, declaring that the United States no longer needs its traditional allies to wage wars in the Middle East. According to Trump, America can now operate without them. That statement alone reveals the mindset driving this entire crisis. Because alliances aren't optional accessories in global security. They're the foundation of stability. But Trump's worldview isn't built on cooperation. It's built on something much more dangerous: strongman thinking, ego, and the magical belief that raw power can replace diplomacy. And that kind of magical thinking is exactly how catastrophic wars begin. Now, let's slow this down for a second and actually look at the details coming out of the reports. Because when you start reading what's happening on the ground, the situation becomes even more disturbing. And I want to walk you through this step by step. First, we start with what happened in Pakistan, an incident that shows just how quickly this conflict is spiraling outward. According to US officials, protests erupted outside the American consulate in Karachi after the assassination of Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei. The anger was immediate and explosive. Demonstrators pushed toward the compound, broke through outer security barriers, and chaos followed. Now, here's the part that should make everyone pause. U.S. Marines guarding the consulate reportedly opened fire as crowds surged toward the building. At least 10 people were killed during the confrontation. Officials later admitted that Marines had discharged their weapons, although they claimed it was still unclear whether those specific shots caused the fatalities. Think about how serious that is. American troops firing live rounds during a protest outside a U.S. diplomatic facility overseas is extremely rare. Security at these locations is normally handled by private contractors or local authorities. The fact that Marines themselves were involved suggests something extraordinary was happening. In other words, the threat environment had already reached a level that forced direct military engagement. Video footage circulating online shows tear gas filling nearby streets as demonstrators scatter. Witnesses reported hearing gunfire echoing around the compound while police attempted to control the crowd. And the unrest didn't stop there. Across Pakistan, demonstrations spread rapidly as news of the assassination and the military confrontation circulated. Authorities imposed nationwide restrictions on large gatherings after at least 26 people were killed in protests linked to the Iran crisis. 26. That's the number tied directly to unrest triggered by this escalating conflict. But the geopolitical shockwaves don't stop in Pakistan. Let's look at another warning sign coming from Russia. Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, issued an extremely blunt warning about Trump's strategy. According to Medvedev, the campaign targeting Iran could push the world toward the edge of a third world war. And before anyone dismisses that as routine geopolitical rhetoric, listen to what he actually said. He argued that the assassination of Iran's supreme leader could transform the cleric into a martyr for hundreds of millions of Shiite Muslims worldwide. In Medvedev's words, that kind of event could ignite a much wider confrontation. In other words, the very action Trump claims is meant to weaken Iran may actually strengthen its internal unity. And Medvedev didn't stop there. He also predicted that Iran will now accelerate its nuclear weapons program in response to the attack. From Tehran's perspective, the logic becomes brutally simple. If your leadership can be targeted, then the only real deterrent left is nuclear capability. You see the dangerous spiral forming here. Assassination leads to outrage. Outrage leads to escalation. Escalation leads to nuclear acceleration. This is how geopolitical disasters unfold. Meanwhile, Israel is pushing its own urgent timeline. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned that Iran's nuclear infrastructure could soon become invulnerable if new underground facilities are completed within the next few months. According to Israeli intelligence assessments, Iran has begun constructing heavily fortified underground sites designed to shield its missile and nuclear programs from future attacks. That's why Netanyahu is arguing that immediate military action is necessary before those facilities become impossible to destroy. But here's where things become even more complicated. International inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency reported that they had not observed clear evidence of major damage to Iran's nuclear facilities following earlier attacks. That means some of the infrastructure targeted in previous operations may still be functional. So what we're looking at right now is a geopolitical powder keg. One side believes it must strike quickly before Iran becomes unstoppable. The other side believes it must accelerate its nuclear capabilities to protect itself from further attacks. And caught in the middle of all of this is Donald Trump, a leader who continues to insist that everything is under control. That's not strategy. That's magical thinking on a global scale. Now, if this crisis were an isolated incident, you could argue it's just another complicated moment in international politics. But that's not what we're looking at. What we're seeing is part of a much larger pattern surrounding Donald Trump's leadership, a pattern of chaos, impulsive decision-making, and a disturbing inability to understand the consequences of his own actions. And the cracks are showing everywhere. Let's start with the domestic front. While this geopolitical crisis is unfolding, another controversy inside the United States is exploding. A leaked internal government database revealed that Trump's administration has been quietly attempting to rewrite or remove historical information across hundreds of national parks and cultural sites. According to the reporting, the effort targeted material related to African American history, LGBTQ rights, climate change, and other topics that Trump's allies have labeled anti-American ideology. Think about the sheer scale of that. We're not talking about a single museum exhibit or a small policy change. We're talking about a systematic effort to alter how American history is presented across national parks, monuments, and public heritage sites. That's not historical preservation. That's historical manipulation. And when the reports surfaced, the Interior Department rushed to claim that the documents were merely drafts and internal discussions. Officials insisted the materials did not represent final policy decisions. But here's the problem. Multiple internal files reportedly showed employees actively editing or removing references to slavery, civil rights struggles, and other major historical events tied to America's past. You can't just wave that away as routine paperwork. That looks a lot more like a political project designed to reshape public memory. And the pattern doesn't stop there. Inside federal agencies, the Trump administration has already taken steps to silence internal dissent. Employees in several government departments have faced disciplinary action or termination after signing open letters criticizing policy decisions. Some workers at the Federal Emergency Management Agency were reportedly removed after expressing concerns about leadership. Employees within environmental agencies faced similar consequences after challenging the administration's climate policies. This is what happens when a government becomes allergic to criticism. Facts become inconvenient. History becomes negotiable, and loyalty to one political figure begins replacing professional judgment. Now, layer that domestic environment on top of the international chaos we just discussed. A global conflict escalating in the Middle East, deadly protests erupting across multiple countries, attacks targeting American diplomatic facilities, warnings from foreign governments about the possibility of a wider war. And sitting at the center of all of it is a president who continues to behave less like a steady leader and more like a man ranting and raving about loyalty, betrayal, and personal grievances. This is the same Donald Trump who spent years boasting about his business genius. Yet his business record is littered with failures. Bankrupt casinos, collapsed ventures, and a trail of projects that promised greatness but ended in embarrassment. Trump Steaks, Trump University, Trump Casinos, each one sold as a symbol of unstoppable success, each one eventually collapsing under the weight of its own hype. And that same pattern, inflated confidence followed by disastrous consequences, now appears to be playing out on the global stage. Except this time, the stakes aren't failed stakes or empty casinos. This time, the stakes are international stability. And when you step back and look at the whole picture, a disturbing conclusion begins to emerge. This isn't just a series of unfortunate events. It looks more like the early stages of a much larger political and geopolitical unraveling. And when you put all of this together, the picture becomes painfully clear. This isn't about strength. It isn't about leadership, and it certainly isn't about protecting democracy or global stability. What we're watching right now is the dangerous collision between ego, power, and reckless decision-making. On one side, you have allies stepping back, refusing to blindly follow a disastrous path toward wider war. On the other side, you have Donald Trump lashing out, attacking partners, and insisting everything is under control, while the consequences of his actions ripple across the globe. That's the difference between reality and propaganda. Reality is messy, complicated, and sometimes frightening. Propaganda tells you everything is perfect, while the world quietly catches fire. And the truth matters now more than ever, because democracy only survives when people are willing to confront facts instead of comforting lies. So if you care about accountability, if you believe in independent journalism, and if you want more breakdowns that cut through the political noise and expose what's really happening behind the scenes, make sure you hit subscribe. Let's keep building a community that values truth over spin and facts over fantasy. And let's keep paying attention, because the story unfolding right now is far from over.